Welcome back to our congressional debate. The next question is from LaDonna Harvey to Scott Peters.
You know, sometimes you have to duke it out and sometimes you have to reach consensus. So give one solid example from public service when you've been able to bring those two opposing sides together to make an important deal.
1 minute, Mr. Peters.
Well, everyone knows what a mess the Veterans Administration has been, and we heard that from Phoenix. Now, San Diego hasn't seen a lot of that, but everyone in Congress also knew we had to act. I worked, and there was a big gulf between Democrats who seemed to think it was about money and Republicans who seemed to think it was about blame. And it was a little bit about both. We need a culture change in the Veterans Administration, but we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that because so many people are returning, we need more money. But people can come together. I look for a point of agreement. I made a motion on something that seemed like it wasn't the biggest issue, but it was providing in-state tuition for veterans on the GI Bill for them to go to college or to get educations. And it was very, very hard for Republicans to vote against that when we put that on the floor because everyone agreed on it. And so the national press gave my motion credit for being the catalyst for getting people to come together and really come to an agreement that's going to start to solve the Veterans Administration problem with a new secretary and a culture change, and also with the funding that's going to have to help us deal with a lot of these challenges we're going to have from these big numbers of vets coming home.
Mr. DeMaio, 30 seconds for your response.
Well, an area where I'm very passionate about is open government, making sure that the public has a right to know what's going on inside government and to be part of the process. Right when I was elected to the City Council, I reached across party lines to partner with Donna Fry, a Democrat. And working with her, we were able to enact important reforms to open up the City Council docket and process to more deliberation and involvement by the public. Then, in 2012, the City Council unanimously came together to pass my Sunshine Law for San Diego, putting a wide array of government records online so the public could search and see all financials and contracts to know where their money's going.
Mr. DeMaio, I'm going to have to cut you off there. Your time is up. Mr. Peters, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Sure, the best indicator of who's able to work across the aisle is who's supporting us. Donna Fry is supporting me, by the way. But if you look, I have the traditional Democratic constituencies from labor, all the environmental groups who saw Mr. DeMaio with the worst grades in the City Council, Planned Parenthood, but also a lot of groups that are traditionally or often Republican. Police and fire are supporting me, as are firefighters, as are dentists, doctors, most of the recent chairs of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, and as I mentioned, 1 of 5 Democrats supported by the U.S. Chamber. That's working across the aisle.
Okay, back to our panel and our question from Jerry Sanders for Carl DeMaio.
Phoenix and Salt Lake City have both solved the issue of chronic veteran homelessness. What will you do to ensure that San Diego gets its fair share of funding to do the same?
This is an issue that's very near to me because when I was orphaned at 13, my brother, sister, and I were split up. My sister actually lived on the streets out of her car in the first month of her trimester of pregnancy for 3 months, not knowing where my sister was. I was very worried for her. And so when you think about this for veterans and for the general population, we must do more to deal with the issue of homelessness. It's a major issue not only for these individuals, but for many of our neighborhoods, such as Pacific Beach, downtown, throughout our city. I'm committed to continuing the leadership I started on the City Council of collaborative, bipartisan efforts on homelessness. I was part of a City Council that helped cite the first one-stop center downtown to deal with ending the cycle of homelessness amongst that population, plus citing the Aspire Center, which deals with mental health and post-traumatic stress counseling and services for our veterans. I'm absolutely committed, and I will be an advocate in Washington on this very important issue that's personal to me.
Mr. Peters, 30 seconds from you.
Well, I feel a lot better about that if Carl DeMaio hadn't voted against every one of the 4 budgets that Mayor Sanders proposed when he was on the City Council. Now he claims credit for the things that other people accomplished, even though he voted against them. The fact is that we have the 3rd largest population of homeless veterans and the largest population, the whole large population of homeless veterans, the 3rd largest population of homeless. I've been working with the Downtown Partnership to make sure that we get our fair share of federal funding. I have a bill to shelter homeless veterans, and as I mentioned before, we've started the Military Transition Support Project to provide jobs, job skills training, and personal counseling to veterans to keep them on their feet and off the streets.
Mr. DeMaio, back to you for 30 seconds.
Scott, the record is clear. Each of those projects, the Downtown Homeless Shelter, the One Stop Center, which is an innovative program from across the country, the Aspire Center in Old Town for our veterans, I voted for each and every one of them, and I was an integral part of trying to build consensus and constituencies to support those projects. More importantly, you were part of the city council that could never seem to get the winter shelter done on time. And so the winter shelter would go weeks, if not months, late, putting in jeopardy the homeless population during the winter months. My city council that I participated in on a bipartisan basis got on schedule for those winter shelters.
All right, now rapid fire questions. Each of our candidates will have 30 seconds to respond to this. No response, that is, from the other candidate, no rebuttal. We alternate who goes first. We'll start with Scott Peters. The first rapid fire question, on the issue of high-speed rails, do you want it here in California, and how would you fund it, or would you rather see that money going towards the roadway infrastructure? Mr. Peters?
I voted against the current funding for the current project as it's configured today. I believe in the statewide rail modernization for transportation, for job creation, and for the environment. But the problem with this plan is $68 billion plan, nothing for San Diego to Los Angeles, which is the busiest corridor, passenger rail corridor outside of Boston and Washington, D.C. We only need about $3 to $5 billion to provide the best quality rail service in that corridor. But until we have that, I'm not going to be able to support it.
Mr. DeMaio, same question. You have 30 seconds.
It's a flawed project, only sustained by billions of dollars in our tax money. Those dollars should go to other transportation priorities. And what we should do with our high-speed rail program in California is take a page from Florida, which has a very innovative public-private partnership that will allow us to get rail at a far better price in the areas where we actually need it for economic growth. But this is a state, this is a nation that has neglected its infrastructure. And Mr. Peters, while on council, you raided our infrastructure funds, leaving us with potholes and storm drains and water pipes that were bursting.
All right, second rapid fire question, be back to you, Mr. DeMaio. How do you balance secure borders with immigration reform? You have 30 seconds.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's a balancing act. I think it's a foundational act. We have to secure the border first. There are reforms to make in immigration in terms of visas, the process, to make it streamlined and strategic, to hold people accountable. But if you don't secure the border, then we will always have an immigration crisis in this country. Mr. Peters had a chance to vote on a very reasonable bill just 2 months ago, but under pressure from the House Democratic leadership, he bent and voted against that important bill that would allow Border Patrol the tools they need to secure the border and deal with the immigration refugee crisis that we see today.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
Well, I'm one of the most independent lawmakers in Congress. I don't bow to pressure, to Mr. DeMaio. The problem with that bill is that it was far inferior to the comprehensive approach that the Senate adopted with 69 votes, Republicans and Democrats, that secured the border, yes, but also dealt with those labor shortage issues that are hurting San Diego so much. In the innovation economy, Qualcomm, Solar Turbines, they need high-skilled labor, they need immigration reform. We're educating some of the smartest people in the world at the best universities in the world, and we kick them out so they could start their jobs someplace else. That makes no sense. The Senate bill would solve those problems. We just need a vote in the House, but your Tea Party won't let it happen.
Mr. Peters, we're going to go with you again as we alternate. This next question, do you want a national policy on marijuana? Why or why not?
No, I believe that each state should be able to decide what it wants to do about marijuana itself. We may have a very different view in California, from Colorado, from Alabama. What I believe the federal government should do is allow each state to make that decision. So change the federal law so that if a state wants to legalize it, the state can be permitted to do that. If the state wants to legalize it for medical purposes, as California has, the state should be allowed to do that too. The federal government should not get in the way of the states making these decisions on the legalization or the criminalization of marijuana.
Same question for you, Mr. DeMaio, 30 seconds.
You know, I'm taking on my own party on these social issues. I think that we ought to get politicians out of our private lives, allow people to make decisions for their health care, who they want to love in terms of marriage, and of course, when it comes to medical marijuana, respect the votes of the state of California and many other states to deal with this in a different way. I have already announced I would support legislation to decriminalize and get the federal enforcement actions out of states where they have decided to implement, as California has, a medical marijuana ordinance. We should allow people to exercise personal freedoms and get out of their private lives.
Mr. DeMaio, thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off there. Okay, now to the closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute, starting with Scott Peters. 1 minute, sir.
Mr. DeMaio's made an issue of perks in this election, and he's only told you half the story. What he doesn't tell you with no budget, no pay is that when the Tea Party shut the government down, hit the people supporting him, I didn't take my salary. I gave it all back to veterans and seniors who were affected by those cuts. When the Tea Party sequestered with these 8% across the board cuts, I cut my own pay by 8% and gave it to charity. I've turned down the federal pension. I've turned down the federal health care. I've given every cent of my city pension back to libraries. And the thing you just said about my car allowance was remarkable, because he put this in, this is a part of his positive campaign for Congress. He put this in his mailer. He showed you the half of this that shows the compensation I took. But he doesn't show you that I refused to take almost $140,000 of my salary as a city council member. Now, and I did pass no budget, no pay, and we got the first budget that will shut government shutdowns. We'll stop government shutdowns. San Diegans deserve better from their Congress members than folks who would tell half the truth. We have tough issues. We need serious problems. We have serious problems. We need serious people to solve them. I'll be honest with you and continue to
Congressman,
work
I'm
to bring
going to
you the
have to
Congress
cut
that
you off
deserve.
right there. Mr. DeMaio, you now have 1 minute.
You're right, Scott. San Diegans deserve the truth. They also deserve elected officials who are acting with integrity and will do the right thing when no one's looking. Mr. Peters, you're worth over $100 million according to your own financial statements. And in the middle of the city's financial crisis, you voted for a 42% increase in politician salaries. You spiked your own pension.
Didn't take
You
it.
then took your pension early on December 3rd, 2008.
Gave
the
it
same
back.
day,
Mr. Peters, please.
the same day that I led by example by turning down the car allowance, cutting my own compensation 22%. No one asked me to do it. I gave up the pension, $500,000 of lifelong payments, the same day that you enrolled early in your pension system, even though you're worth $100 million. Now, while you were taking these perks, what did you do when no one was looking? You cut services and left problems to us. The only time that you started doing all these things is when people started calling you out. Mr. Peters, integrity is doing the right thing when no one's looking. It's because you owe a debt of gratitude
Mr. DeMaio,
and to your constituents to
Mr.
do the
DeMaio,
right
I'm going
thing.
to have to cut you off there. Unfortunately, we're just getting fired up and the debate is over at this point. That's all the time we have. Don't forget, Election Day is November the 4th. You can get all your political news on 10news.com. In the meantime, thanks for watching.